Welcome back to the deep end. Today we are wading into waters that honestly might feel a little treacherous to some of you.
I think that's putting it mildly.
Yeah. We aren't talking about, cutting back on carbs to lose a few pounds or eating more salad to feel clean.
No.
We are talking about a complete radical inversion of everything we've been told about nutrition. We're talking about a paradigm shift that removes literally everything from your plate except animal products.
It is, without exaggeration, the most restrictive dietary intervention currently being studied. And, usually when we talk about restrictive diets, the conversation is about vanity metrics.
Right, six-pack abs or dropping a dress size.
Exactly. But today is different.
Right, because today we aren't looking at this through the lens of a personal trainer or a gym bro. We are looking at it through the lens of a psychiatrist. We're diving into metabolic psychiatry and the carnivore diet. And the claims here, they are absolutely wild. We are talking about the potential remission of schizophrenia.
Bipolar disorder, severe depression.
Conditions that are often considered lifelong sentences. It's pretty staggering.
It's a fascinating and I'd say high stakes field, and we have a stack of research here, including the brain energy model from Dr. Christopher Palmer at Harvard, clinical studies from France, and deep biochemical analyses that suggests we might have been looking at mental illness all wrong.
That's the hook that really got me reading through these sources. We usually think of mental illness as a chemical imbalance, right?
That's the common narrative.
Too much dopamine, not enough serotonin. We treat it like a fluid-level problem in a car. But Dr. Palmer is suggesting it's not the fluids, it's the engine itself.
Exactly. That is the core thesis. The brain energy theory posits that mental disorders at their root are metabolic disorders of the brain.
A metabolic disorder of the brain.
It's about energy supply and demand.
So let's break that down, because metabolic disorder usually makes me think of diabetes or, obesity. How does that apply to someone hearing voices or experiencing mania?
It all comes down to the mitochondria.
The powerhouse of the cell.
Right, we all remember that from high school biology. But in the brain, that powerhouse is doing some incredibly heavy lifting. Your brain is an energy hog. It consumes about 20% of your body's total energy.
Despite being, like 2% of your body weight?
Just 2%.
So it's a supercomputer running on a laptop battery?
That is a perfect analogy. Now, imagine that battery starts failing. The voltage drops.
Okay.
In a computer, the screen might flicker, processes lag, or the hard drive starts corrupting data.
Right, you get the blue screen of death.
Exactly. In the brain, when mitochondria fail to produce enough ATP, that's energy, or they produce too much oxidative stress, the neurons begin to misfire.
And that misfiring is the symptom.
Precisely. If the visual cortex misfires, you might hallucinate. If the emotional regulation centers in the prefrontal cortex brown out, you could spiral into mania or a deep depression.
Wow.
So Palmer argues that what we call schizophrenia or bipolar are essentially just the downstream effects of this metabolic brownout in specific brain regions.
So the logic follows. If you fix the energy supply, you fix the brain.
That is the promise.
Oh.
But I want to be the voice of caution right up front here.
Please do.
This isn't magic. It's biochemistry. And while the potential is incredibly exciting, it comes with some heavy baggage. We're going to talk about cholesterol numbers that would make a traditional cardiologist faint.
I saw those in the notes. They're terrifying on paper.
Terrifying. We're going to talk about the debate over scurvy and the very real psychological trap of obsession that can come with a diet this restrictive.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I think for most people, carnivore diet just sounds like that guy on Instagram eating raw liver and yelling.
Right.
But you're saying there is a sophisticated medical theory underneath all that noise.
There is. And to understand it, we have to start with the bioarchitecture of the diet itself.
Right.
We need to understand what this actually looks like on a plate versus, what the body does with it.
Okay, so what is it? Because when I hear carnivore, I picture a guy eating 10 chicken breasts a day, just massive amounts of protein.
But looking at the data here, that's not it at all, is it?
No, and that's a critical distinction, a very common misconception. If you look at the macronutrient breakdown in the clinical research, this is a high-fat diet.
High fat.
We are talking 65 to 80% of calories coming from fat.
80%.
80%. Protein is actually moderate, about 20 to 35%. And carbohydrates are effectively zero, less than 5%.
80% fat. That is hard to even wrap your head around. How do you even do that?
Well, it means you're not eating lean meat. If you sat down and ate skinless chicken breast or a very lean sirloin, you'd actually run into trouble.
Trouble how?
You can't generate enough ketones from protein alone. In fact, too much protein can trigger something called gluconeogenesis.
Which is?
It's where the body turns protein into sugar, so you completely defeat the purpose of the diet.
Oh, wow. So you could be eating only meat and still be running on sugar if you do it wrong. You could. So you need the fat to run the engine. You're eating the fatty ribeye. You're adding tallow or butter. You're eating the salmon skin.
Okay, so compare that to the standard dietary guidelines for Americans.
It's a complete inversion. The standard guidelines suggest 45 to 65% of your energy should come from carbohydrates.
And carnivore is less than 5.
Less than 5. It stands in direct opposition to the food pyramid we all grew up with.
Okay, so we know what they are eating, but why does this fix the brain? You mentioned the metabolic brownout earlier. How does eating fat fix a brownout?
This brings us to a concept I really love called the metabolic bypass.
The metabolic bypass, okay.
To understand this, we have to look at how the brain normally gets its fuel. In a standard diet, your brain runs on glucose sugar.
Which is why we get hangry or foggy when we haven't eaten carbs for a while.
Right. But here is the problem. In many of these psychiatric conditions, there's evidence that the brain becomes insulin resistant.
Insulin resistant. So like what happens in type 2 diabetes, but in your head?
In a way, yes. Think of insulin as the doorman. Its job is to open the doors, specifically these things called GLUT transporters, to let the sugar inside the cell.
Okay, so if you're insulin resistant, the doorman is on a break.
The doorman is asleep on the job. He's not opening the door. So you have a situation that researchers describe as starvation in the midst of plenty.
Starvation in the midst of plenty.
You have plenty of fuel sugar circulating in your blood. In fact, you might have high blood sugar, but the brain neurons are literally starving because they can't get it inside.
So the brain is technically starving to death while swimming in food. That explains the brownout. That makes so much sense.
Exactly. Now, this is where the carnivore diet acts as a medical intervention. When you remove carbohydrates completely, your liver has to switch gears. It starts turning body fat and dietary fat into these molecules called ketone bodies.
Right.
Specifically one called beta-hydroxybutyrate.
Ketones, we hear about them in the keto diet context a lot, usually for weight loss.
We do, but for the brain specifically, ketones are, well, they're like magic.
Yeah.
Because here's their superpower. They don't use the insulin-regulated door to get into the brain.
They don't.
They use a completely different entrance called monocarboxylate transporters, or MCTs.
They sneak in the back door.
They bypass the bottleneck entirely. The lazy doorman, the broken insulin system, doesn't matter anymore. Suddenly, these hypometabolic starving parts of the brain are flooded with a high-octane fuel source they can actually access. It's a valid fear, a very common one. And this is where the concept of nose-to-tail eating becomes, well, it becomes non-negotiable.
Nose to tail.
If you only eat muscle meat, just steaks and ground beef, you will eventually run into deficiencies. That's a fact.
Okay.
Muscle meat is great for B12 and zinc, absolutely, but it's poor in vitamin A, folate, and copper.
So where do you get those if you aren't eating a salad?
The organs.
Ah.
The liver,
Yeah.
specifically. In the source material, they emphasize that liver is practically a multivitamin. It's incredibly dense in bioavailable vitamin A and folate. The data shows that if a carnivore includes liver just once or twice a week, they consistently meet or even exceed the nutrient reference values for almost everything essential.
So the catch is that you have to be willing to eat liver, which, let's be honest, is a hurdle for a lot of people.
It is an acquired taste for many, but biologically it closes the nutritional gap. And you might need some bone-in fish like sardines for calcium, because steak doesn't have calcium. But generally speaking, animal products are far more nutrient-dense than we give them credit for.
So the idea that you need plants for vitamins is, strictly speaking, not true.
It's not true, provided you're eating the whole animal.
Okay, so we've got the fuel source ketones bypassing the sugar blockage. We've got the nutrient density covered by organs. But let's go deeper into the brain chemistry, because mental illness isn't just about energy. It's about mood, anxiety, regulation. The sources mention something called the GABA-glutamate ratio. This sounds like the actual tuning of the radio station in the head.
It is.
Yeah.
This is one of the most compelling parts of the science for me. Think of glutamate as the brain's gas pedal. It's excitatory. It makes neurons fire.
No.
You need it for learning, memory, quick reactions.
Yeah.
But if you have too much glutamate activity, you get anxiety, mania, and eventually neurotoxicity.
Neurotoxicity.
The cells literally burn themselves out.
And GABA is the brakes.
Exactly. GABA is inhibitory. It calms things down. In conditions like bipolar disorder or severe anxiety, the gas pedal is stuck to the floor. There's too much glutamate and not enough GABA. It's just too much noise.
And how does eating steak fix that?
It's not the steak itself. It's the state of ketosis. Nutritional ketosis changes the way the brain processes these chemicals. It actually helps the brain convert glutamate into GABA.
Wait, really? It turns the gas pedal into the brake?
In a manner of speaking, yes. It increases the synthesis of GABA from glutamate. This effectively lowers the noise in the brain. What's fascinating is that this mimics exactly what some of our most powerful mood-stabilizing drugs do.
You're kidding.
No. Drugs like Valproate are designed to increase GABA activity. The diet does it endogenously from the inside out.
That is incredibly cool. It's like self-medicating with your own metabolism.
It is. And then you have the inflammation angle. We see mention in the research of the NLRP3 inflammasome.
Which sounds like a spaceship from a sci-fi movie.
It does, doesn't it? It's a complex of proteins involved in the immune system. Think of it as a hair trigger for inflammation. When it's activated, it releases a flood of inflammatory cytokines.
And we know that depression and schizophrenia are highly inflammatory states, right?
Highly inflammatory. The carnivore diet seems to hit this inflammation with what some researchers call a double tap.
A double tap. Explain that.
First, you are removing the triggers. Some people are sensitive to certain plant antigens, things like lectins, oxalates, that can trigger the immune system. By removing them, you just stop poking the bear.
Okay, so removal of irritants, that's tap one.
Tap one. Tap two is that the ketone body, beta-hydroxybutyrate itself, acts as a signaling molecule that tells the immune system to calm down. It specifically inhibits the NLRP3 inflammasome.
So you stop irritating the system and you actively add a calming signal.
Correct. And this lowered inflammation is crucial for another neurotransmitter that everybody knows about, serotonin.
The happy chemical.
The happy chemical. But here's where it gets really interesting. A little counterintuitive. There's a paradox here.
Okay.
To make serotonin, you need an amino acid called tryptophan to get into the brain. Tryptophan is found in meat.
So eating meat should give you plenty of tryptophan. Seems simple enough.
You'd think so. But tryptophan has to fight to get across the blood-brain barrier. It uses the same transporter as 5 other amino acids, the large neutral amino acids, or LNAs.
So it's a competition.
A huge competition. When you eat a big steak, you're flooding your blood with all of them. It's like a traffic jam at the toll booth. And tryptophan is a tiny car trying to merge with a bunch of semi-trucks.
So how does it get in? I thought usually carbs helped with this.
They do. On a standard diet, the insulin spike from carbs clears those other big amino acids into your muscles, leaving the road wide open for tryptophan to cruise into the brain.
But carnivores don't spike insulin.
They don't. So for a long time, critics said carnivores must have low brain serotonin. They should be depressed.
But the data doesn't support that. People report the opposite.
No, they often report better mood. And the reason seems to be something called the kynurenine shunt.
The kynurenine shunt. Okay, explain that one. Because that sounds like a spy thriller title.
It's a metabolic pathway. When your body is inflamed, it activates enzymes that effectively steal your tryptophan.
Steal it?
Yes. Instead of turning it into serotonin, the body shunts it down this other pathway and turns it into kynurenine, which eventually breaks down into something called quinolinic acid.
Quinolinic acid. That sounds bad.
It is neurotoxic. It's been linked to depression, schizophrenia, and even suicide. So inflammation literally steals your happiness and turns it into a brain toxin.
That is terrifying. So the raw material meant to make you feel good is being hijacked to poison you.
That's a perfect way to put it. By lowering inflammation with the carnivore diet, you stop this theft. You shut down the shunt. So even if less tryptophan gets into the brain because of that traffic jam we mentioned, almost all of it is being used correctly to make serotonin. None of it's being turned into poison.
That is a wild mechanism. It's not just about what you eat. It's about what your body does with what you eat.
Exactly. It's about optimizing the internal environment.
Okay, enough biochemistry for a minute. Let's talk about real people. Because all the theory in the world doesn't matter if it doesn't work in practice. The source material highlights a specific case study that really stuck with me. The 32-year-old patient.
This is a profound case. A 32-year-old male diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia, PTSD. He had a history of homelessness, suicidal ideation, and had failed multiple medication regimens. Nothing was working.
That's the definition of treatment resistant. He was essentially written off by the system.
He was. They put him on a diet of ground beef and tallow. That's it.
Just beef and fat, no meds.
They eventually tapered the meds, but the primary intervention was the diet. He achieved sustained nutritional ketosis, and the result was complete remission of his psychotic symptoms.
Complete remission, as in no more voices, no
Yep.
paranoia.
Gone. He was able to reintegrate into society, hold down a job. This is someone who was essentially lost and is now functioning. It's an N of 1, sure, but the effect size is undeniable.
That gives me chills. I mean, to think that just changing food could do that.
It's paradigm shifting.
But we also have a larger study from France, right? Dr. Georgia Eade was involved in this one.
Yes, this was an inpatient study, which is the gold standard because you can control exactly what people eat. You know they aren't sneaking pizza on the weekends.
Right.
31 adults with severe, persistent mental illness, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar. These are very sick patients. They were put on a ketogenic diet, mostly animal-based, for anywhere from 6 days to over 200 days.
And the scores, I saw some numbers in there that were just jaw-dropping.
They used the HAM-D score for depression. It went from a mean of 25.4, which is severe depression, down to 7.7.
Wait, 7.7, what does that score even mean?
And that score is in the range of remission or, at worst, mild depression.
So they went from severely depressed to basically not depressed.
In a matter of weeks, for many of them. For schizophrenia symptoms, they used the PAN-S score. It dropped from 91.4 on average to 49.3. These are patients who are not responding to standard drugs, suddenly getting their lives back.
And they also lost weight, which is a big deal with antipsychotics.
About 10% of their body weight, yes. Which, for patients often on medications that cause massive weight gain and metabolic syndrome, is a huge bonus for their overall health.
We also have that survey from Harvard, the Lenners study. That one was huge, over 2,000 people.
It was. Now, we have to be careful with this one.
Why is that?
It's self-reported data, which means it's subject to selection bias. People who tried the diet and failed probably didn't fill out the survey.
Good point. The dropouts aren't represented.
Exactly. But the signal is still incredible. 95% reported improved overall health. 98% of diabetics improved or resolved their condition.
98%.
And for those with anxiety and depression, over 90% reported significant improvement.
Even with selection bias, you don't usually see numbers like 98% in medical surveys.
You really don't. It suggests a very strong biological effect for those who can adhere to the regimen.
Okay, so we have the mechanism, we have the anecdotes, and we have some pretty compelling clinical data. Now we have to talk about the elephant in the room.
The heart.
The heart. Because if I tell my doctor I'm eating nothing but ribeyes and tallow, he's going to tell me I'm going to have a heart attack by Tuesday.
He probably will.
And the data here shows something called the lean mass hyperresponder. That sounds intense.
It's a fascinating and very controversial phenomenon. There is a specific phenotype of person, usually lean, athletic, active, who goes on a carnivore or strict keto diet and their lipids go haywire.
Define haywire.
We're talking LDL cholesterol, the so-called bad cholesterol, shooting up to 200, 300, sometimes even 500 mg/dL.
Whoa, normal is what, under 100?
Ideally, yes. So these numbers are stratospheric. By all conventional wisdom, these people should be dropping dead.
But they're not.
They're not. And here is the paradox. Their HDL, the good cholesterol, is usually very high, and their triglycerides are rock bottom low.
So it's a mixed bag.
It's a specific triad: high LDL, high HDL, low triglycerides. And there's a theory for this called the lipid energy model that suggests this isn't a broken system, but a highly functional one.
How can 500 LDL be functional? That sounds insane.
Well, the theory goes like this. Since these people aren't eating carbs, their body runs on fat. The liver packages fat into VLDL particles to send energy to the muscles and other tissues. Think of VLDL as a full fuel tanker leaving the harbor.
Okay, the tanker goes to the muscles.
The muscles and tissues strip the energy, the triglycerides, out of the tanker. As the particle loses its cargo, it shrinks. And what does a VLDL particle become when it shrinks down?
It becomes an LDL particle.
Exactly. So the LDL isn't just gunk floating around waiting to clog an artery. It's the empty fuel tanker driving back to the depot to get refilled.
So in this model, high LDL is a sign of high energy trafficking, not necessarily disease.
That's the theory. It's a marker of a fat-based metabolism in high gear.
But does it clog the arteries? I mean, that's the only thing that really matters at the end of the day.
That is the million-dollar question. And we have some early data. A study looked at 80 of these lean mass hyperresponders. They scanned their coronary arteries using CT angiography.
And
After an average of nearly 5 years on the diet with these sky-high LDL levels, there was no greater atherosclerotic plaque burden compared to controls with normal LDL.
5 years of super high LDL and no extra plaque, that breaks everything we know about cardiology.
It certainly challenges the simple LDL is strictly bad narrative. But, and this is a huge but,
Here it comes.
mainstream cardiology, organizations like the British Heart Foundation, are very clear. We do not have 20-year data. We don't know if this catches up with you in a decade or two. It is a calculated risk.
So if you're doing this for, say, schizophrenia, you have to weigh that potential long-term heart risk against the immediate life-changing benefit of your brain working again.
That is the trade-off.
Yeah.
It's a serious clinical decision.
Let's pivot to the other end of the body, the gut. We are constantly told, fiber, fiber, fiber. You need fiber to poop. You need it for your microbiome. If you eat zero fiber, doesn't your gut just stop working?
You would think so, but the clinical reality for many is different. The microbiome is incredibly plastic. It shifts, and it shifts rapidly. Within 3 days of switching to a carnivore diet, the bacterial population changes completely.
What happens? Do the bugs just die off?
Some do. You see a predictable drop in the fiber-fermenting ones, like Roseburia, but you see a rise in bile-tolerant bacteria, like Allostipes and Bolophila, which are adapted to a high-fat, high-protein environment.
Okay.
But here's the surprise. A study looking at a long-term carnivore of 4 years found that he still had so-called fiber-fermenting bacteria in his gut.
But what were they eating if he wasn't eating any fiber?
They adapted. They switched their diet. They started eating the host's mucus layer and amino acids instead. The gut ecosystem found a way to survive.
That sounds a little gross, eating the mucus layer. Is that safe?
It sounds alarming, but the mucus layer regenerates constantly. It's a natural turnover. And for many people, especially those with SIBO-small intestinal bacterial overgrowth or severe bloating, removing fiber offers immediate, profound relief.
How so?
There's no fermentation, no gas, no bloating. Fiber is fuel for bacteria. If you have bacteria in the wrong place, or the wrong kinds of bacteria, feeding them fiber is like throwing gasoline on a fire.
So for some people, fiber is actually the enemy.
In the context of a dysbiotic gut, yes, it can be.
Okay, let's move on to the other risks. The fine print. Because nothing is free. We talked about cholesterol. But what about scurvy? I mean, we are talking about a diet with no oranges, no lemons. Isn't scurvy a real danger?
Theoretically, yes. The RDA for vitamin C is 75 to 90 milligrams. A well-formulated carnivore diet provides maybe 15 to 20, mostly from the fresh meat itself.
So why aren't their teeth falling out? Why aren't they getting scurvy?
This brings us to the glucose ascorbate antagonism theory. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it's fascinating.
Let's break it down.
Glucose, sugar, and vitamin C are molecularly very similar. They look alike, so much so that they actually fight for the same entrance into our cells, the GLUT1 and GLUT4 transporters.
They use the same door again, just like with the amino acids.
They do. In a high-carb diet, you have tons of glucose crowding that door. So you need a lot of vitamin C just to ensure some of it gets in. You have to flood the system to overcome the competition.
But in a carnivore diet,
there is no glucose blocking the door. The door is wide open. The theory is that your actual requirement for vitamin C drops precipitously because absorption is so incredibly efficient.
that makes sense.
And this aligns with historical data on the Inuit, who didn't eat plants but didn't get scurvy as long as they eat fresh, raw, or lightly cooked meat.
Fresh meat being the key.
Crucial. Vitamin C degrades with heavy cooking and processing. If you only eat beef jerky and drink coffee, you will get scurvy. It happens. But with fresh steaks and organs, it seems to be sufficient for most.
Okay, now I want to talk about a risk that isn't physical, it's psychological. And this one feels really important because we're talking about a group of people who might already be vulnerable, orthorexia.
This is a major concern for me as a clinician. Orthorexia is an unhealthy obsession with pure or clean eating.
Right.
The carnivore diet is binary. It's meat or not meat. It's black and white. This structure is very, very easy to slip into a mindset where food becomes a source of intense anxiety and fear.
The purity trap.
Yes. I've seen people online panic because their steak had a sprinkle of pepper on it at a restaurant, or the pan had a drop of olive oil. They feel contaminated.
Wow.
They start to treat a piece of broccoli like it's poison.
And that leads to social isolation, right? You can't go out to dinner with friends. You can't go to Thanksgiving at grandma's because she uses vegetable oil in her cooking.
Exactly. And social isolation is a huge driver of poor mental health. So you have this perverse situation where a diet meant to fix your mental health actually ends up ruining it by isolating you from your community, from your family, from joy.
That's a tragic irony. How do you distinguish between someone who needs to be strict for therapeutic reasons and someone who is just becoming pathologically obsessed?
It's a very fine line. And clinicians have to be careful. Is the patient adhering to the diet because it keeps their schizophrenia in remission? That's therapeutic adherence. That's medicine.
Okay.
Or are they adhering to it because they are terrified of a single carrot? That's pathology. That's an eating disorder.
It sounds like context is everything.
It is. And of course, there are other physical risks too. Kidney stress, for example.
Yeah.
If you have pre-existing kidney damage, the high protein load can be an issue. And calcium deficiency is very real if you ignore the nose-to-tail advice and skip things like bone-in fish or dairy.
So bringing this all together, we've covered the brain energy theory, the miraculous remissions, the cholesterol spikes, the scurvy debates. What is the synthesis here? Who is this for?
I think we have to view the carnivore diet as a high-risk, high-reward medical intervention. It's not a wellness trend.
Right.
For the general public, someone just looking to get a little healthier, it's probably unnecessary and, frankly, socially very difficult.
Too extreme for the average Joe who just wants to lose 10 pounds?
I would say so. But for the metabolic psychiatry patient, the person with bipolar, schizophrenia, or severe depression, who has failed every medication thrown at them, it can be a lifeline.
Yeah.
It is proof of concept that food is brain function.
It changes the question from what is wrong with my mind to what is wrong with my energy.
Exactly. And for those people, the risk of high cholesterol in 20 years might be absolutely worth the reward of having a mind that works today.
But it's not a DIY project. You shouldn't just read a blog and start this if you have a serious mental illness.
Absolutely not. You need monitoring. You need to work with a clinician. You need to check your lipids, your inflammation markers. You need to make sure you aren't developing an eating disorder. And please, for the love of God, don't forget the liver.
Eat your liver, folks.
It's nature's multivitamin.
You know, this leaves me with a final thought. We've spent this whole time talking about how extreme and radical this diet is. But if a diet of only meat can potentially cure schizophrenia by fixing cellular energy, what does that say about the balanced modern diet we're all eating?
That is the provocative question, isn't it? If removing modern processed foods fixes the brain, maybe the modern processed foods were breaking our brains in the first place.
Something to chew on. Thanks for diving deep with us today.
Always a pleasure.
We'll see you next time.
And take care of your mitochondria.